Ready to take your verdicts and jury selection to the next level? Jury consultant Harry Plotkin and trial lawyer Dan Kramer are your ticket to tipping the scales before trial begins. You're not just picking a jury, you're picking justice. Produced and powered by LawPods.
Welcome back to another episode of Picking Justice. Harry, good to see you, man. I recently had the pleasure of working with your wife in San Diego on a TBI trial I did with my partner, Teresa Johnson. We had 45 minutes to pick a jury of 58 people in the whole room. It's a great judge.
Dating.
That was my
It's like speed dating, Dan.
It is speed dating. I mean, that was super speed dating. It was interesting, man. But I learned a lot from the things we've talked about here on how to handle it. You still dealing with that, Harry?
Oh, all the time. Yeah. I just had my last two jury selections this last week and the week before in Colorado and Portland, Oregon. Yeah, it's the whole room. You're getting it done in a day. You're opening, later that afternoon. I mean, more and more judges, they just love it. It's just, what's wrong with putting a few biased jurors on there if you could get it going faster? So, but there are ways, we taught to do it and just focus in on the jurors that are the leaders and focus on just on a couple of questions that really matter and hearing from everybody. But like Randy, like in a, speed dating, it's like, you got to talk to if you got to make a decision, you got to talk to everybody. If you got to go on a date with 12 of these people, the worst thing that you can do is leave somebody that you haven't talked to. So I hope you talk to everybody and you did great in that trial.
Yeah, okay. Well, except for one guy who was a lawyer, and that was my biggest regret. My other biggest regret, is like a teaching point, is that I think, and Claire kind of got mad at me, not really, but she said that I should have asked the judge. I should have turned to the judge when the 45-minute was up and said, can I have him another 20 minutes? Because we were really doing it efficiently. We're making good points. And I think the judge, because he even commented after, he's like, that was very, very well done, very efficient the way we were doing it. I think he would have given me more. So it never hurts to ask. But before we get started, that wonderful voice we heard in the very beginning, that is the legendary Randi McGinn. It's such a treat to have her on this show. She is just one of the greatest trial lawyers out there in the country and human beings. Great communicator. Randi, I've been listening to a bunch of your videos and other podcasts, getting ready for this one, and it's just really great stuff. I learned a ton doing that. She's one of the founders of Athea Trial Lawyers, as well as her New Mexico firm of McGinn, Montoya, Love, and Curry. She has had just amazing verdicts, 52 million. She's had, 67 million, 42 million, and on and on. She wrote a great book called Changing Laws, Saving Lives. She's the first female president of the Inner Circle of Advocates. So we're really honored to have you on, Randi, to this show and teach us about jury selection. And I want to dive right in, Randi, if you don't mind.
Okay, that's good.
I listened to one of your shows, or it's a video or something, and you said in jury selection, you asked the question, I think it was a wrongful death, and you asked the question to jurors of, has anyone here suffered profound grief? And I thought that was such an interesting question, and I want to hear why you do it, why you ask that question, and what was your strategy behind that kind of powerful question? Because I imagine it kind of puts jurors a little bit back in their seat, like, makes them maybe think about, well up a little bit in their eyes. So I'd love to start with that.
Well, so I thought that given the work that we do for a living, that I understood profound grief, because we're dealing with, catastrophic, horrible things happening to our clients all the time. And the truth was, until my husband of 30 years died about 5.5 years ago, although I thought I could understand it, you can't understand it until it really happens to you. And that gave me such insight, because somebody who's experienced profound grief can explain it to the other jurors, right? And if you haven't, people don't really understand it. They just think that they do. And that was probably, my husband dying was probably the hardest thing I've ever done in my whole life.
So
And
sorry.
I'm a very upbeat, positive person. Had you told me that I would be a crying person, I would have said, "Oh, that's just not me." And there you go. Your husband dies and you're crying every single day. I mean, it just is god awful. And it made me realize that people who've experienced that would be wonderful jurors. But what happens when we voir dire on damages is, of course, we get up and voir dire on damages, and the defense stands up and says, "Okay, all of you who've suffered a horrible tragedy, this would be too hard for you, wouldn't it? And everybody gets off the panel. And so you have to figure out a way to find those people, and then not just find them, but to keep them. And so I had not asked that question ever until after my husband died. And now when I ask, and you always want to encourage participation by raising your own hand when you ask a question like, how many of you have experienced profound grief? Because I have now experienced it too. And so I asked the question. And just asking the question, I can tell you, without anybody saying a thing, because what happens to people who have not just lost somebody or known somebody who died, but who lost somebody that was so important to them, their eyes start to glisten. I mean, it's instantaneous. You ask the question, how many of you have experienced profound grief? And bingo, you can just pick the people out without them even raising their hands. And then you ask them about what happened and who the person was and why were they so important to them. And this is particularly important in wrongful death cases. And you get stories, wonderful stories of how they cared about these people. And then now you got to do step 2, which is to keep them on your jury, right? So how do you keep them? You say to them, and by the way, some of them you can't keep. If they've just lost somebody within a month or two of when the trial is happening, and they're so upset even about talking about it, you have to recognize that you probably can't keep that person. But other people for whom the profound grief has happened a year or so before, you say to them, this is really important because when we get to damages, we need people on the jury who can explain profound grief to the other jurors because they don't understand it. And you say to the juror, look, as hard as this is for you, we need you. It's important that you be on this jury. And so do you think that you could bring that experience into the jury room and explain to the other jurors what it's like to lose somebody so close to you? And they commit to, yes, I can do that. And even though it will be difficult for you or it will bring up sad memories, you can still do that. And you won't be sympathetic to either side. No, I will not. You'll just explain to the other jurors. You explain to them why it is they need to be on this jury. And now when the defense stands up and says, wait a second, you've had this horrible experience. Won't it color everything you do? They've already said, no, that's not going to happen. That's not going to happen to me. And I can be here and I need to be here to explain this to the other jurors. And so it's a way of keeping them.
Harry teaches prehabbing so well, and I think it's one of the most underutilized tools that we have and that we must use. Because we're always so scared that the PI attorney is going to be, everyone's going to hate us. But it's actually, there's really good jurors out there now that we're not prehabbing. Harry, What are your thoughts?
Yeah, no, I know. I was curious to hear how Randy takes that question and what the plan is for it. And it's something that I do all the time. I love it is I teach people, we go first and we don't get to come back and rebut. I don't know if there's any states where you get to do a little bit of voir dire rebuttal. I think I might have seen one or two, but very rarely. So yeah, if you're not identifying, I love that you're, okay, let's identify the people I know the defense is going to go after. And if they get to them first, it's really easy for the defense lawyers to trick all those people into thinking, oh, that grief that you've had, that disqualifies you. I'm sorry, you can't be in this courtroom, and tell them why they can and convince them. It's a battle over convincing these jurors. Is what I'm feeling or what I've experienced, is that a bias, or is it just part of who I am and a part of a conscience and not necessarily going to, totally change my judgment? And so I think that's great to get to them first. Those are the first people that defense lawyers want off. They're just sympathy. If you feel an ounce of sympathy, or if you've had a similar experience, they want to try to trick those folks into saying it can't be fair. And I always really like to talk about sympathy too in prehabbing, and because I don't know about New Mexico, but I haven't never seen a state that says that they can't feel sympathy.
Correct.
But defense lawyers will tell them that. They'll be like, oh, sympathy has no place in this courtroom. You have to leave any ounce of sympathy outside. That's not true. So yeah. So how do you deal with, when they're talking about, if you have juror says, because I lost somebody, I just feel like I'm going to feel so sympathetic for somebody else who's lost somebody.
I tell them just straight up that you are allowed to feel sympathy for these people. In fact, everybody on this jury panel can feel sympathy for them. The thing you can't do is let sympathy affect your decision. That's the thing you can't do. So you're allowed to feel sympathy. You can cry for our people. You just can't have it affect your decision. And so can you agree to feel sympathy, but to then follow the law and follow the rules of the court? And people say, yes, of course I can,
And I would even go stronger than affect, because I always worry that some jurors are going to go, well, of course, in some ways it's going to affect my decision. I like to throw out a word like, you're not going to let it overrule your decision.
That's a great
in this
word.
case.
That's
I like that.
I mean, Yeah, like if it's and you say, like if it's a disputed liability case, you can say, if the evidence convinces you this defendant did absolutely nothing wrong, just because you feel sympathy, are you going to find for the against them and force them to be responsible? And anyone with a conscience will say, well, of course not. And so there you go. So sympathy is not going to overrule you, even if you feel it. So it's, I think that's a great approach to get to them first. And I can't teach that enough. I rarely see lawyers do that. Sometimes when I'll tell them to prehab these folks, oh no, it'll be fine. And
No,
once that
it's
defense
not.
lawyer gets up there and gets their hooks in them, they're gone and it's too
It's-
late for you.
Yeah, they
Yeah.
do.
I love the
something.
overrule. I'm kind of pissed, Harry, you haven't taught me that sooner, man. I mean, we've been working together for years, but the concept of getting them to understand, will it overrule this feeling you have? You could apply that to everything, right? I mean, almost every prehab.
Yeah, you use
setup.
different language if you're trying to. If you're trying to keep somebody or trying to get rid of them a little bit, and you got it. It's subtle, but yeah, if it's someone that you're trying to get off who's biased, you wouldn't use that word overrule. You'd say, is that going to color your judgment at all? Is that going to influence you at all? You do use these even just a little bit. And,
In fact,
yeah.
I just lead them, Harry. I just say, and of course, because you've thought about this so much. I mean, obviously you've formed this opinion over years of thinking about it. And so because this is something you hold firmly yourself, nobody could convince you otherwise. And of course it's going to affect how you feel. And even if somebody instructed you not to have that opinion, this is the one that you own, right? That you've come up with on your own and you couldn't give it up, could you? Right?
Exactly.
So you compliment them about how wise they are and how they've come to this opinion on their own and all that stuff.
Yes, you got to be super cognizant of and careful about the exact language you choose if you're trying to convince someone that they can be fair versus can't be fair, and you can't use the same language. Another one I'll throw out for you guys before we move on is I just used this one recently. I was like, so cloud your judgment. Like that's not gonna cloud your judgment, is it? That experience you've had. Nobody wants to think that their judgment is clouded. So use that one too. Like, oh, of course it's not going to cloud my judgment. Whereas if you want somebody who's got a really negative experience off the jury, you can say, that's a conviction that you got that you're not going to be able to get rid of,
So Randy, we're talking a lot about that prehab with the people who have had profound grief. Are you ever concerned though, that if you're saying that, we do need your experience of the grief that you felt in the jury room to explain to the other jurors, do you ever get objections to that from the defense saying, well, they shouldn't bring in what grief they felt? That shouldn't be part of what's discussed.
I never have had an objection because usually they're by the time we're talking about it, they're already crying. It's like so the defense doesn't want to upset them. So
Interesting.
and so it's how I started is you're entitled to a jury of your peers, and that means somebody on the jury who understands the kind of grief that my parents who've lost their kid have experienced. And that's why it's important if you're able, and you say to them, if you're able to do this at this point in your life, after having been through this experience, if you're able to sit on this jury, you would be a really important juror. You would be really important to share your experience with the rest of the jurors. And I've never had anybody object to any of that.
No, I like that. I like that a lot.
It's very similar to sometimes I've had lawyers say, we need people from all perspectives, not just one perspective. And that's the beauty of the system. And you're convincing them, you feel one way and you've had certain experiences, but we need diversity on the jury. We can't just have 12 people who've never had a bad thing happen to them. I mean, would that be fair? And sometimes the other jurors will be like, that wouldn't be right.
And then how do you, because you try a lot of cases against big corporations, do you also prehab the anti-corporate bias? Harry and I talk about this a lot, is that, the fear if you're suing like a big landlord or, huge corporation, and, the defense is going to ding all the people who, especially nowadays, I feel like, who are really anti-corporation, anti-large corporation. Do you do any prehabbing there as well to make sure that those jurors are not going to be kicked?
Guys, I don't actually, because I want all them to say all this horrible stuff about the corporation before we start the case, even if they could strike them. So, because they can't strike them all, because in my experience, all of the jurors feel this way. The only people who don't are people who are like work for a giant corporation, and those people don't have those kind of feelings. And so I think of jury selection sometimes as getting jurors to testify, not prehabbing, Harry, but pre-testifying about the issues in our case. And so I want them to talk about stuff that's going to come up and issues that are going to come up about corporations. Or, for example, when I'm doing a medical malpractice case, I will find the nurses or people who work in medicine on the jury who I probably will not keep on my jury. But I say to them, have you ever been in a situation where somebody asked you to cover something up at the hospital or hide some bad thing that happened? And this testimony comes out to the jury pool. Oh, yeah. That happens to me all the time as a nurse. The doctors don't write that down and blah, blah, blah. I mean, so where you're getting testimony about the issues in your case from the jurors who probably, I've never been brave enough to keep a nurse or a doctor in a med mal case yet, but get this testimony from them first before they're going to go off the jury panel.
That's interesting. Yeah.
I think you can do both, though. I think you can have them testify, and
Yep.
then here's how I would do it my way. And then at the end, I would say, with all of it, it sounds like what really got you upset was specific things that they did, actual wrongdoing, right? Not
Yes.
just the fact that they were a corporation in the first place, right? So, and jurors, and then you tie it into, that's not a bias. Can you judge this company based on what they actually do in the evidence, as opposed to just they're guilty no matter what they do? Because jurors are allowed to get upset at the evidence, and if you can get them,
Yes.
yeah, exactly, and so, and one of the big things I do is like, getting upset at actual wrongdoing is having a conscience. It's not having a bias. Bias is
Right.
like, I don't care I'm going to judge you. No matter what you do, you lose. So I think you can do that too. You can get them to testify or do all those wonderful things, and then at the end say, but you could still be fair. I'm sure the defense loves it when you're having your cake and eating it too.
Well, so Randy, this whole testifying thing, I really like this concept. So a lot of people, a lot of philosophy and a lot of our guests, you get a really good juror for you. You want to keep them quiet because you don't want to expose them to the defense. It sounds like you have a slightly different take. Like if you have a good juror for you that you're very, the defense is just going to do whatever they can to get that person off for cause. They're going to ding them no matter what. Will you just let them keep talking and say all the good stuff for your case?
Yes. Especially for those people that they're going to identify and strike no matter what you do. That
Right.
there's just certain people that they're going to strike. And so tell me about like your experience working for an insurance company and why you quit and how horrible they were and how they cheated everybody and they're blah blah blah, and then we're suing the insurance company, right? That is tremendous. And the funniest part is if I were the other side, I'd be objecting. I'd go approach and say, let's just let this person off right now and stop having them talk about this. They never stop them from talking about all this stuff. It just is the most wonderful sort of like pre-testimony of the case, that all these jurors hear what the other jurors have to say.
And what about on the opposite side, though? You get a really bad juror who's spewing all this stuff. Do you?
I stayed up and object and say,
Okay.
and I do. That's what I do. I approach and say, obviously, this person is not going to sit on the case, and so let's just stop asking this person questions. Especially if we've got 45 minutes for 58 jurors. You say, we don't have time for this person to go on and on and on about this. Can we get to other jurors about this stuff? So
have you ever arrested at
we
the end
just
of voir
tried a
dire?
case. Pardon me. We just tried a case. We just tried a case against the highway department, New Mexico Highway Department. And there was some guy who had worked for the highway department and quit because they were so incompetent. This guy testified for, 10 minutes about how horrible they were. And there were all kinds of dangerous conditions. And we'd report them and they wouldn't do anything about it. And we couldn't get people out there to fix stuff and on and on. This went on for 10 minutes and they never objected. It was just wonderful.
Wow, they didn't move for a mistrial, or
No,
they didn't.
no.
That's crazy.
No. He just went on and on and on. It was fabulous. He was great.
Harry, what's your philosophy on that? On letting the really good ones just kind of get it all out there.
That's a good one. As long as
do you think it matters to the other jurors?
No, as long as they're saying reasonable things, and especially if they're talking about actual experiences and not just they're just I hate they're just going crazy. Yeah, if what they're saying is reasonable to the jurors, I'm okay letting them go on and on. And so as long as we have tied that person down and made sure that the defense can't get them for a cause. And they say, no, despite all this, I could judge the evidence fairly, and I'm not going to find against this company if they didn't do anything wrong. But let me tell you what I've seen. Yeah, let them go. And then,
Harry, we knew this guy was going for cause. Because he said, I can't be fair. He said, I can't be fair to the highway department because of my experience with them. And let me tell you about it.
Oh,
So
okay.
tell
Well,
me
yeah.
more. It was just like, tell me more about that stuff. He's going, but please
Tell me why you
everybody
can't
on
be
the
fair.
jury pool,
Yeah.
tell
Convince
us all
us.
about it. Yeah, it was great.
Yeah,
It
no,
was
I think
great.
I agree. And I would think that a lot of the time the defense would just get up there. But even better, if the defense gets up there and throws a big fit and tries to keep some stuff from the jurors are not sitting there thinking, this is prejudicial. It's not probative. They're thinking like, I need to hear, this is important stuff. I want to hear about it. So yeah, let them go. Or let the defense get up there and look like they're hiding something.
Yeah, both. I totally agree. Both ways. You're doing good. You're looking good to the rest of the jurors.
I want to tell your listeners about that thing I learned. I've been practicing law already for 45 years, but I just learned something in this last case. Oh, I'm amazing that you can keep learning stuff
I know.
as you try cases, which had never occurred to me. Years ago, I had somebody, my parents had lost their son who was beaten to death in a high school in the middle of the day. A fight in the hall, and the teachers heard it. Nobody came out, and he was beaten to death in the hall of a high school. And we are doing voir dire on damages and ask, to find the bad jurors, to find the poisonous jurors. Said, how many of you could never award a lot of money for the death of a child? And some guy, there were two really bad people, and both my parents are sitting there. One guy said, well, I would never give anybody anything more than what you get for being killed in the military, which at that time was $10,000. That's what you get. I think it's $250 now, but you get $10,000. And the other person said, in front of these parents, well, I don't think somebody should get lucky just because their kid dies.
Ugh,
Whoa,
So
jeez.
lucky.
right? Anyway, I didn't learn back then what I got told by the jurors here. We were asking the same kind of questions about how do you feel about awarding damages for someone's kid dying. And this juror says to me, well, I can't say that in front of his parents. I can't tell you the truth in front of his parents. And it had never occurred to me because everybody brings their clients to voir dire so they can look at the jury too and blah and introduce them to their. And I just said right in the middle of jury selection, that had never occurred to me. And I turned to the judge and said, can I ask my clients to leave so he can be honest to me about how he feels about damages? And my rule going forward is going to be, I'm not having my clients there for jury selection anymore. I'm just not
Yeah,
there. I mean, it had never occurred to me that people were not saying things that they believed because they didn't want to make the grieving parents feel bad.
Yeah.
we always do that. Like I'll have my client in there in a non-wrongful, both, but I would have my client in there, and then right as I'm starting my opening, I'll be like, oh, talk about brutal honesty. And then I'll have them leave and walk out. And I tell the jurors I did that on purpose so that you all can feel very confident about it, or please just share exactly how you feel without
Right.
worrying about the client. Yeah.
Well, Dancy, you're much smarter than me. It took me all
No,
this
I'm very, very far from it. Far from it. I learn from you all the
Listen,
time.
oh my God, I could have found out more stuff over all these years if I didn't have my clients there.
So what did the juror do when the parents left? What did the juror say?
Said I just do not believe in awarding big damages for anything. I mean, it was that kind of thing of, I mean, he was the kind of person you wanted to find and get off the jury.
Yeah.
And we got him struck for cause because he said, and no matter what the judge instructs me, I'm not awarding a whole lot of money. I'm just not. I think jurors are out of control and blah, 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 all that stuff, Anyway,
So what is your kind of introduction to that topic of damages of money? I mean, do you say, we're going to ask for $58 million. We're going to ask for tens of millions.
I
Like how do
never
you slow
mention an
play?
amount of what we're going to ask for until closing.
And what's your
Because
philosophy? Yeah.
because how much I ask for at the end of the case depends entirely on how the evidence came in. But that doesn't mean I don't mention numbers. So I will I start the damages talk by talking about if this were a contract case and somebody had taken a loan from the bank to build a skyscraper or whatever the building is, to build a public building. And then I pick a number that is slightly higher than what I'm going to ask for, what I think I'm going to ask for. So I say somebody gets a loan from the bank to build a building that's going to cost $20 million or $100 million if it's a skyscraper. The person doesn't build the building and he doesn't pay the money back. He just runs off with the money. And if this were a lawsuit about whether the bank gets $100 million or $20 million. And then I pick the person who is the most conservative person on the jury. I go to that person, the person who said, I hate lawsuits and lawsuits are out of control. That person, I pick that person. If we were in that case and it was the bank suing somebody to pay back the $100 million, how much money would you award? And the most conservative person who said, I don't believe in lawsuits always says, $100 million. And not only that, I might give them interest because they had run off with the money. And then I say, well, how is it so easy for you to give money in that case, but so difficult in a case like this where we're trying to value somebody's life? And now we start talking about why that's different and how, and for this person who's probably not going to be on the jury, they may say things like, well, because people exaggerate how hurt they are, or people, they come up with reasons why it's a different thing. It's harder. And then we go to the other people. And I mean, that opens up the discussion about why is it so easy to give money to a bank in a contract case. And then I never mentioned a number again until closing, although, as you all know, we've mentioned a number, haven't we? When at the end I ask for $80 million, when we've talked about $100 million as the example in Voir dire, they're not surprised.
I really like that setup. I'm going to steal that. So I imagine, Randy, when you've asked that conservative juror, he says, yeah, with interest, of course, I'd be happy to give the bank, whatever they ask for. And then you say, well, this is not a contracts case. This is a wrongful death case or a permanent injury case, whatever it is. Why is it different? You ask that to that same person right off the gate, I imagine. Okay.
I do.
Yeah.
I do. Then you find out if he says because people exaggerate and they lie and they, people want something for nothing. And then after he gives a really horrible answer, I say, how many of the rest of you feel the same way he does? Because I'm going to find them all and get them all struck for cause. And I say to him, no matter what the judge instructs you, you're not going to fine a lot of money for this person because you think people are exaggerating. And then now I'm going to bounce off after I find all the bad people. Now I'm going to go back and see, does anybody feel differently? That people's lives are worth as much as a building.
And I imagine you're using a similar analogy in your
more.
closing when you're talking about damages, right? Like a building where, the analogies you use for you don't. Okay.
I don't. I actually don't. But,
yeah, they get it.
They
They
get it
get it.
already.
It doesn't
They're
seem
all
to
people who
matter
think.
because they've been anchored to the $100 million, right?
Do you ever say, now let's talk to the people who like people more than buildings?
There
Everybody
you
well, I
go.
didn't say that. But
There
it's
you
true.
go. But that's, it's really, and like I said, the conservative people always say, I've never had somebody say, I wouldn't give the whatever it is, $20 million. I wouldn't give $20 million. No. They always want to give $20 million plus additional money.
For the building.
So it's just a fascinating social experiment.
But I like how because I think it's really important for lawyers to do this. When they start talking about money and talking about damages, and most of these jurors have never thought about these things or thought about what the value of a life, quality of life or a life that's been taken. I always think first you have to frame it in somewhat of a positive way so that they get life is valuable. And now tell me why it's not valuable. But because if you just go out there and go, millions of dollars for, an injury, how do you feel about that? You're going to get a lot of false negatives from people who, if you had kind of framed it right, isn't the value of a life more than a building? They would be like, I guess it is. But if you don't frame it at least a little bit in a positive way, you get a lot of jurors who just kind of go, oh, that sounds, I don't know, it sounds like a lot of money. Millions is a lot of money. And they start to snowball on each other. And so I like how you kind of use an analogy that put a positive spin on it and then says, who disagrees with me? And you'll get those folks. But at least that the other people are thinking, yeah, life is worth more than a stupid building. Or a bank loan or whatever,
And
So
the
I
other
like
thing
that.
I've done to find the truth about the bad jurors is to say, how many of you have heard about some huge verdict that you thought was just out of control, where the jury was out of control? And of course, the McDonald's coffee verdict is from New Mexico. So it's from our state.
Yes.
So that's always the one that comes out. Oh,
Well,
yeah,
there's a
that's
new one
easy.
that's
Ask
going to come out.
McDonald's
The Starbucks verdict, I think.
Yeah, I took you off the hook. Yeah.
Rowley's,
Yeah.
Nick Rowley's.
Yeah, the Starbucks
Yeah,
verdict
yeah.
changed
Nick
it.
Rowley's. So,
Yeah. Well, that was my
There you-
jury. I picked that one. So you can thank me
oh,
for
yeah, really good. Good for
Oh,
you,
Harry's
Harry.
been on a roll.
taking me
I
off
mean,
the hook.
Yeah.
Starbucks verdict. No, Claire. Just a couple weeks after that one, Claire was picking a jury and said, "Yeah, they brought up your Starbucks thing."
Oh, yes.
I'm like,
Yes,
we'll
and
see.
then you ask them. I never try to defend the verdict. I'd say, well, so tell me why you think it was so crazy and blah, 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 blah. And then I ask them the opposite question. How often do you hear about a corporation that a horrible thing caused horrific injuries to somebody and they got nothing? And the truth is, you don't hear about that as much as you hear about the big verdicts. And why is that? Why is it that you think you hear more about the big verdicts and not about the person who got nothing from the horrific thing? And I asked them, which one do you think is worse? Some people say given too much money, but most people say having somebody horrifically injured and not giving them anything. And now we talk about, how are you going to keep from being either one of those things? How are you going to approach damages to make sure that you're awarding a fair amount when somebody's been horrifically injured and that they're taken care of for the rest of their life? That's how we do it. And then that gets us into the damages discussion and what kinds of things do you think you should get if somebody's hurt? And we go into all the different elements of damages and whether they can award all those things.
Well, let me ask you on that then. So in California, we have, KC 3905A, which you could list out. There's usually 9 different things, grief. anxiety, emotional distress, mental suffering, all those things. Is it similar in New Mexico?
Similar, less
Okay.
categories, but we talk, that the easy stuff. I mean, medical
Right.
bills are easy. They say, oh, medical bills, sure. Pain and suffering. How do you decide what somebody's pain is worth? And this is always like Perry probably sees. This is always the place where lawyers get tripped up because they think if the juror has a similar injury to your client, like they have a back problem, that they're going to be good. And that's not necessarily true because they're thinking, I've had a back problem my whole life and nobody's ever paid me $1 million, right? I mean, there are people who have the same exact injury and say, I'm not giving anything because nobody gave me $1 million for this.
And even when there are those jurors certainly who are like, but there's ones who are not. "Hey, I've had a back injury and I'm super sympathetic to them and I think they should get money." But to them, it's like, it's not unimaginable. They're like, it's not $10 million. I mean, I'm still pretty happy. And so sometimes the jurors who have never suffered anything sometimes can be the highest damage jurors because you want those jurors who are going, I can't even imagine what that's like. The
Yeah.
power of somebody who's a good juror, of course, who's like, I can't imagine what that's like, is more than someone who goes, I know what it's like and it's not great, but it's not the worst thing in the world. And so sometimes, I don't know if Randy, and I was going to ask you, when you're talking to someone who suffered grief or someone who suffered another injury, or I even do this to someone who's like, if I see that there's like a nurse who works in ER or something, and sometimes I'll say, I'm sure that you've seen worse or you've experienced worse. Maybe you've seen much worse, depending on what your case is. You've seen probably quadriplegic people. Is a part of you kind of feeling like, why are we here? Why are we talking about a lot of money if this is no worse than something you've seen, or maybe you've seen much worse than this? And jurors will give you different answers. And so, yeah, some good, some bad. How do you like to handle those people who have experienced the same thing or worse?
Worse is always a concern. I would ask them, how would you gauge this injury compared to that? I mean, how would you approach it? How would you try to value it based on what you've seen versus what kind of injury this person has? Because how they're going to approach the evidence, I think, is probably as important as any opinion they give you. Like, how do you award damages that are fair as opposed to being way out of line or being too little? How are you going to go about doing that? And sometimes they don't know. They say, I just don't know. Do you give me some kind of guideline? And then you can get into, yes, we do. We give you these elements that the court's going to give you these elements of damages that you get to award money for. So you get medical bills. That's, anybody have any problem? That's an easy thing to award because you're going to have a number. And then you get to pain and suffering. How are you going to judge what somebody's pain and suffering is worth? And we're going to talk about, maybe go back to the initial analogy, is pain and suffering, somebody having pain for the rest of their life, more or less valuable than a building that you built or something that we've talked about as far as the analogy is concerned? And that's always just a very interesting discussion, and people come up with interesting ways that they're going to value this, including on the bottom end, where people say stuff like, I'd never give them more than $10,000. That's the person you don't
Yeah,
want.
we had that, Harry, in a trial in San Mateo in the Bay Area. And we had a pediatric oncologist who was one of the potential jurors, and it's just terrible what she sees, right? Kids with cancer all the time. And I remember she was just like,
Yeah.
I see the worst of the worst, and I just feel a little uncomfortable awarding millions of dollars to this woman who had a very, legit injury, couldn't really use her right arm too well anymore, had very limited range of motion. She's just, I just don't see how I could do that. And so it was really just us just having to get that, well, that's always going to be in the back of your mind. You're going to compare whatever evidence you see, you're going to compare that to what kids are going through and they're not getting money. Are you going to be able to set that aside? And I think eventually she just gave us that she couldn't set it aside no matter what. And it would always be in the back of their mind. She would compare what happened to them to the damages we're asking for. And she just didn't think it'd be fair. So there's definitely a way you get them down that path to get them for cause, even though she's probably a wonderful person, big heart, the type of people you'd want on your jury, but it's risky, right? When they see terrible stuff.
And of course, and you understand what she's saying completely, because what she's thinking is, but you're still
Right,
alive,
of course.
right? I'm dealing with kids who are dying of cancer. What are you complaining about? You're still alive and you could still do stuff even though you only have one arm. And so that's the kind of thing, that's why you can never just, I think because jury selection is so scary, particularly for us A-type personalities that become lawyers, because it is the moment where you are most out of control. And of course, an A-type personality like me deals with that by trying to do these trees where I try to think of, here's my question, and what
Yep.
are all the possible answers, and what am I going to do with each one of those answers? And of course, still the jury comes up with something that you've never thought of. So it's like walking a tightrope all the time. And so because lawyers are so afraid of jury selection and being out of control, they take the surface answer because it's like Sally Fields. Oh, they like me. They really like me, right? And I'm going to take that surface answer and don't go below it. And that's always deadly because you really don't know how they really think unless you go a little bit deeper, like with your oncologist, that you think, oh, she's going to be really sympathetic and wonderful, except
Yeah.
that she sees much worse than what you're dealing with in your case.
And you can, yeah. And I always tell people, you can't just ask about their experiences and then make an assumption. They can go either way. I've had so many, just picking nurses and doctors, more nurses I've kept than doctors, but doctors are dangerous for different reasons. But some nurses are just like, if you talk to them about it, I'm the most empathetic person in the world. And oh my gosh, I mean, nothing, just because I've seen worse doesn't mean, and some will say, everybody gets hurt and if they're doing all right, so you just don't assume that someone's had a loss or an injury or something, or what they deal with in their work, that you got to probe a little bit. Unless you're in federal court, I mean, where you get no voir dire.
Well,
But
yeah.
probing is, and how you probe. I mean, no matter how you probe, really, just the fact that you're trying, you're going to learn a lot
Yes.
more than if you just kind of shy away from asking and digging a little bit.
Randy, what's your method to prepare for voir dire? I'm always interested to see how different attorneys do it. I'm sure you've been doing this for a long time. You've tried big, huge cases. You have a method to the way you do it. Or do you sit down with each new case and just come up with a new list? You write out all your questions. What's sort of your preparation method?
I ask the things that scare me most, Dan. You figure out the things that scare you most by thinking about it, but also by doing focus groups where, when we do a focus group before trial, we have the best lawyer argues the defense side, and we have our new lawyers argue the plaintiff side, because you want to find out where
Yeah.
your problems are. And then you find out what the scariest thing is, right? You find out what scares you the most, right? And that's usually what I lead with, is the scariest things. And I'm really honest with the jury about, we had a case years ago where the prison hired a doctor who molested the inmates. And they would come in and he would say, and I never understood this part, he would let him give them a blowjob. I never understood that. Maybe as guys, you can explain that to me. But that was the deal. He'd say, I'm not, you're a diabetic. I'm not giving you your insulin unless you let me give you a blowjob. I mean, it was like, oh, I don't get that. But that was what was going on. And of course, in the prison, took a while for anybody to report it, because if you report as an inmate that you had sex with your doctor, that the doctor required you to have sex to get your medicine, now you become victimized by everybody in the prison because they've heard that that's what you're doing. So finally it got reported, and we ended up having 53 men who were sexually assaulted by this doctor. And we did this Man in the Moon focus group. I don't know if you've ever done one of those. They're so much fun. All right, so here's how it works. I'll tell you how the Man in the Moon focus group works. And I tell my young lawyers, tell the people that are here that we have somebody from another planet that's going to come in, and they're trying to understand the stuff that they've heard from Earth. And you need to help explain it. And my young lawyer said, of course, I can't tell them that. They're going to think I'm crazy. I said, no. It's going to be really fun. Watch how they get into it so quickly. So I come in and I sit down and I said, hi, I'm the person from another planet. And we've been watching you and studying this thing. And, it seems like there's these places where you take some of the people and you put them in these places, and they've got wires and people guarding it, sometimes dogs all around it. And we wonder what those things are. And the jurors say, well, are you talking about prisons? Well, yeah. Is that what you call them? Okay. Tell me about that. And why are you separating people from humanity and all this other stuff? And anyway, we get into it with them explaining what prisons are for. And do you keep people there forever? No. They get out. And so does that mean that you're doing nice things for them while they're in prison, so they're nicer people when they get out, and all this stuff? We get to the point where, should people in prison be sexually assaulted? Fascinating. All the women said yes. Especially if they've sexually assaulted somebody. In fact, if they've sexually assaulted somebody in my family, I'm going to pay the guards to sexually assault them. And so we're thinking, oh, this case sucks. We can't take this case. We've got all these clients. And we did this before we even filed suit. We did this focus group. And then we changed one fact. We said, well, what if it's not the guards or the other inmates? It wasn't. They wanted other inmates to molest them, not the guards to molest them. We said, what if it's not the other inmates that are molesting him? What if it's the guards or the medical personnel that are molesting him? And it was like a light switch in this focus group. It was, whoa, wait a second. It's okay if the other inmates molest them, but it's not okay if the guards or the medical providers molest them, because they're supposed to be setting an example and trying to change their behavior and return them to the world better than not. And so we ended up taking all the cases, all the 53 cases, except for one guy whose crime was that he had carjacked this little old couple and then put them in the trunk and set the car on fire with them alive. And we just said to him, you shouldn't have gotten molested by this guy. But nobody's going to care because of what you did. I mean, they're just not going to give any damages. But you'd still ask those scary things. In Voir, getting back to Voir after that long story, you'd still ask those kind of questions in Voir. What do you think about what should happen to people in prison? And how do you feel about somebody who gets sexually molested in prison? Does it make a difference to you if it's the inmates that are doing it or if it's a guard or a medical provider that's doing it? And I would start off by saying, if we had to try that case it actually settled, so we didn't have to try it. But I would have started out by saying, I've got to tell you the thing that scares me the most about this case. I think you're not going to care that because these guys are prisoners, they got sexually molested by this medical provider. I think you're not going to care about that. So I want to ask you about that because that's the thing that scares me the most.
Are there really a lot of people out there who, that in all your focus groups, had said, yeah, they should get sexually harassed or molested in prison?
Yes.
Really?
Yes.
Bad
and
things
if they
happen.
molested somebody, if they molested somebody, I would
Just
hire
eye for
a
an eye,
prisoner
huh?
to molest them while they were in there. Oh yeah. It was rough. That's when we were thinking, oh, we need to rethink this case. But it turned out it was okay.
So the defense gets to get
Yeah, I
in.
was
Why were
thinking the
they in
same
prison in
thing.
the first place? I mean, yeah.
Yes.
Why is that
Really?
relevant?
Wow. Gosh, that's pretty prejudicial.
It shouldn't be relevant. It shouldn't be relevant, but it's relevant to damages, right?
Maybe.
Maybe. Anyway, we thought that likely the judge would let in what they were in prison for. And the problem is, you kind of want what some of them are in prison for because it's not as bad as the guys
Yeah.
who are up
Yeah.
to people. Like you want
If it's
them
not
to
as bad,
be in
yeah.
for robbery or something as opposed to something that hurts somebody. So
For
so
sure.
yeah, interesting.
How do you even talk about damages?
So
And
that's
I mean, how would you even have talked about, how do you get people to award millions of dollars to an inmate who's going to be incarcerated? How would you even talk about that?
You probably don't, Dan. Not millions of dollars.
Okay. Well,
in fact, the jury's thinking, why would I give millions of
Yeah.
dollars to this guy? What you can do is you go after the system, of course, Dan. You go after the system that would allow such a thing. And you make people think, it's not just horrible murderers that are in prison. It's young guys who you're hoping to rehab and to come back into the world and make a life for themselves. It's your nephews and grandkids that are going to be
Right.
in prison. So in this case, it was the private prison. We privatized prisons here in New Mexico, and so they hired this guy to be the medical director in the prison because he was the cheapest because he'd done bad things and had his license taken.
And you
away
get
other
punitive
places.
damages when it's a
So-
private company, which is a big factor.
Yeah. So you talk about them trying to save money and putting this horrible monster in to molest guys in prison because they save money.
To bring it back to jury selection, you try to find jurors who are down to attack the system when the system fails, like to really get exposed who those jurors are that get angry at bad systems. Harry, what's the best way you set up the attorneys for those kind of conversations?
I mean, in this situation, I mean, I like what Randy was talking about but opening up to, I would ask him, is a prisoner who's in jail, is their quality of life worth a lot less than everybody else? I mean, have they kind of forfeited the right to have freedom for sure, but how about their quality of life? Is that something that, and get jurors talking about, no, they should have a bad quality of life. They need to be punished versus, no, I mean, they should be in prison, but I think they should still have at least an okay quality of life while they're there. That's one way I would do it. But I would, in terms of getting jurors given a big verdict, I mean, I would use that phrase. It's the only way to hold this prison fully accountable for how they treated these inmates, and just use fully accountable, because even jurors who may have a little bit of a distaste for the plaintiff, if they realize, if you give them nothing, then they're not going to be fully accountable for this horrible thing that they did. They get it. And so they're going, okay, I don't like giving it to these guys, but I got to hold these prison fully accountable. And the fact that they knew the fact that they knew that this guy had done things before and lost his.
Oh, they knew.
Oh.
And then when the inmates reported him, rather than fire him, they just moved him to a different private prison, and he continued to do the same thing in the different private.
Wow.
So it was just really, really terrible because he charged them so little to come be the medical director for the prison.
No red flags there. What an opportunity. It was
all about the money. Well, the thing that got our focus group that we would have talked to the jurors about too is that these guys are getting out of prison. If the idea of prison is to say we're going to hold you accountable, I mean, the accountability goes, but we're going to hold you accountable. And if you will be accountable, then we're going to turn you loose and you're going to become a productive citizen. How the people that are supposed to be holding them accountable are the ones that are committing these horrible acts. And so even more important to hold them accountable so that these prisoners know the system works when they become victims of crime, and they should return to society and try to work within it as opposed to keep being criminals. So
yeah, that's great.
All right, let's thank our first sponsor. I'm very excited for this gentleman who has decided to support this show. He's a very good friend of mine, John Tisa of Tisa Film and Tech. He has been my trial tech, I think, for the last 10 years. One of my first big trials, he was there working for another company. John Tisa really is just one of the best out there, a very humble guy. But if you need a trial tech, someone that is literally going to work any hours, anytime, he is available. He's quick. Makes your trials seamless, easy. He can do it all, really. We use him for literally everything technological in trial. He does our depo clips. We play a lot of depos and opening throughout our case. He'll do clips on the fly. He helps me with all my PowerPoints and opening statement. He is my right-hand man at trial. He'll sit there in the hot seat. Great with exhibits. Really, I just can't speak highly enough of John Tisa from Tisa Film and Tech. He's doing cases throughout California, but I know he's starting to expand out of state. He has an amazing team of people. When he's in trial and I need him, he always gets me someone who is top notch, so I really can put on the best case. I can't recommend John Tisa from Tisa Film and Tech enough.
If you're trying to do all that stuff on your own, man, you're missing something in terms of prepping for the actual jury. So you guys, if you're trying a case, you need somebody doing that tech and all that stuff for you after hours. I mean, after hours, you're prepping for the next plaintiff. You're not putting together like depo clips and demonstratives and things like that, right, Dan?
No, man. I mean, not at all. And that recent verdict we had in San Diego, I mean, he was working with us. We had a lot of depo clips from video witnesses, like lay witnesses, and he put together this beautiful like montage. It was almost like a documentary, just all these like things these people were saying about my client who suffered a traumatic brain injury. And he put together this thing that was like a documentary that I was able to play in closing because it was all in evidence, and it just looked so good and so clean, and the jury really liked it. So can't speak highly enough of John Tisa.
Awesome. How do you spell his last name for the viewers who want to get in touch with him, or how do you get in touch with him?
Tisa, Tisa Film and Tech, and his information will be on all of our promotional materials and all that. So John Tisa, one of the top out there. Our next sponsor, who is always supportive of our podcast and the Plaintiffs Bar, is Melissa Baldwin from Baldwin Settlements. She really is the go-to structured settlement vendor out there. She's another person that I have known for over a decade. Extremely supportive of the Plaintiffs Bar, CALA, CAOC, AAJ. She will get the best deals for your clients, get them the most money in their pockets from a structured settlement. She works great with clients who may not be that sophisticated. I had a really catastrophic injury death, or not a death, but it was nearly a death, where my client was not very sophisticated. He had some drug issues, and she was able to speak at his level and get him to do a structure that really helped set him up and his family up for the rest of their lives. Got him a great rate. She also structures attorney's fees, which is something I've started to do lately, just structuring fees so you can kind of have a little nest egg built up for either your business or yourself. Melissa Baldwin from Baldwin Settlements, really just a fantastic person, great businesswoman, a great mother, and a great friend who I highly recommend. Melissa Baldwin from Baldwin Settlements. So with that, thank you to our sponsors. Let's get back to this great show we got.
We've talked so much about covering damages in voir dire, and I'm curious to hear, Randy, when you first bring up, you've talked about the example of the bank loan and everything and money. How do you first bring up their ability to award, and saying like, hey, ultimately I'm going to ask you for money for these?
The hardest thing is when you're dealing with a wrongful death case, because people say, what good will it do? Like, what good will it do? And you want to find those people who say, I couldn't award damages in a wrongful death case because it doesn't bring him back. And those people are going to be terrible on your jury. And so you need to find all the people that feel that way, that say, it would be difficult for me to award money in a wrongful death case because it's not doing any good. It's not bringing him back. Then after you find all those people to try to get them struck for cause, you go to the other side, which is, can a big verdict do other things? If it can't bring him back, can it do other things to hold people accountable? Can it make it so that it doesn't happen to anybody else? And what I say to them when people say stuff like that, is said, I will do something in closing sometimes where somebody is dead to tie in this thought that it doesn't make any difference because you can't bring him back. I will say to people in closing argument, you have more power right now than you're ever going to have in your whole life. The power to do justice. You have more power than the judge. You have more power than I, because I can't hold these people accountable, but you can. And the power that these parents wish that you had is that you had the power to say, open up these doors and their son walk in. And I will tell you, if you had that power and we turn and all look at the door and he came walking through that door, they would walk out of this courthouse and never ask for a penny. They'd never ask for a dime from you, even for all the pain of the last 5 years without him, that they would be so grateful that you could do that, but you can't. And so all you can do, what you can do is hold these people accountable and hold them accountable to show how valuable this young man's life was, how not important, just important he was to his family, but all the things he would have done, and what a great loss that is, and hold them fully accountable for everything that they did to him. So that's sort of how you tie it in at the end. I mean, and it's a powerful moment where you say, I wish you could just wave a wand and say, walk in, and the doors would open and he'd walk in, and everybody turns and looks at the door and imagines him coming in. And because you can't, this is what you can do. This is what you can.
No, I love that. Going back to the asking that in voir dire, you get the answer, what good's the money going to do? And say a lot of people say that. Is that an automatic strike? That whoever says that, is that automatic to you? Or sometimes you have to dig, the person could be good and maybe they just it hasn't occurred to them, like the really concept if you're placing a value on it. You're just appraising the value.
I think you get the discussion going. I mean, the best voir dires are where people start arguing about it, right? Where people say, no, it won't do any good. And everybody says, yes, it will. It will keep the company from doing something bad. And if they don't, usually the jury comes up with it for you, and they begin arguing with each other about how important it is to award a big verdict. And if they don't come up with it, you say, have you ever, does anybody believe that if there's a big verdict that values a young person's life appropriately, that can make a difference in society and make a difference in corporate behavior? Yeah, who thinks that? Tell me how that works. And now we're going to get them talking about, and now I may go back, Dan, to the people who said it doesn't make any difference, so I can't award any money. Do you still feel the same way after we have this discussion?
Yeah.
Do you still feel the same way? Because you're right. They haven't thought about it before because they've never had to value somebody's life or award money for somebody's kid dying, And so I might go back to them and see where they are after we have the discussion with the whole jury.
And I assume the holding the companies accountable to make change, you're only doing that in cases where there's punitive damages on
Not
the
in
table,
New
right?
Mexico. In New Mexico, they say that our case law says that the civil system and just getting compensatory damages is enough to make change. And so it's nice.
It's funny because in California, any defense lawyer will flip their lid when you say that, and then we get in a discussion with the judge because it's true. New Mexico has got it right because jurors understand, like, no, but it does. I mean, holding someone accountable for the compensatory damages does make them have to think twice and make them safer and make them more responsible and force them and everything like that. So I wish that maybe we need to just copy your language and send it over here in California and adopt it.
Seriously, we should.
Great.
Yeah, we're allowed to talk about that stuff here.
One thing that I love to do, and that was one of probably the most powerful way I've ever heard someone, an attorney, talk about the importance of damages and what it can do. One thing I like to add on to it that's really fits, I think, with what you're saying too, is I always like to tell the jurors, money is the only power a jury has. And I always like to tell them, for better or worse, A jury can't force a company to do anything. It can't force them to train their employees better or have better, safer policies or care about safety anymore. You can't do anything. The money is the only way only power you have over a company that does, cuts corners on safety or whatever it is. And then the jurors kind of that's another way of them getting, okay, it can help.
You talk about it as speaking in the language they understand. I mean, they didn't do these things because to save money. And so you need to speak to them in the only language they understand, which is money.
Make it too expensive for them to ever consider doing this again. Jurors love to hear that.
That's it.
Like,
Yeah.
okay,
That's it. Although what you should never do, a friend of mine told me about, he kept saying, send a message to this company, blah, 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 blah. So the jury comes back, defense verdict, but we have a message. And they had written up this message that said, even though we're going to fine for you this time, we think you should stop doing this and you should not do it ever again, and wrote out a message for them.
Oh, man.
Talk about like wanting to stab yourself after that one. Yep.
Yeah. All right. Well, on that note, this has been great. The great Randi McGinn. Thank you so much. I know I've learned a lot and our listeners have. It's really been a pleasure. Thank you so much, Randi.
Guys, thanks for
Harry,
having
any
me.
final words?
No, I'm just gotta rewatch this again so I can take copious notes and make every single lawyer I work with watch this, because it was some really incredible ideas and really some incredible, powerful stuff for me.
Yeah.
Well,
Randi,
thanks for
thank
having
you
me,
so
guys.
much.
It's been really fun. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, we'll see you everyone on the next episode of Picking Justice.
Okay.
And thank you to Law Pods for making this possible and really giving young and all trial lawyers out there the opportunity to learn, because we all learn through listening to podcasts, reading books, and just all the stuff out there. So thank you to Law Pods for making this possible.
If you're enjoying the podcast, the best compliment you can give us is sharing it with a colleague who would find it valuable. For all the best clips from the podcast, follow us on social media. You can find those links in the show notes. Have a jury selection story to share? Email us at podcast@pickingjustice.com, and we may address it in a future episode. Until next time, remember, you're not just picking a jury, you're picking justice. Produced and powered by Law Pods.